I said, our most honorable, charismatic, but for me the most affectionate chief guest, a genuine nationalist hero in an age when heroes are disappearing. We are very privileged to have him with us. Our academic star, Professor Ahmed Guru. May I just begin by saying that what a joy it was for me to read such great academic rigor. And these days, unfortunately, academic rigor doesn't come without bias. What I found in particular was the objectivity with which he addressed an issue which arouses controversy even before you begin to talk about it. If I had to describe the book, then I would use the terminology that he himself has used for his narrative. It follows the logic of Ibn Khaldun's famous theory of rise, decline, and renewal, in which renewal comes through a concept which, to my knowledge at least, was not addressed or examined before, the concept of asabiya, the concept of community feeling, the concept of something in a community. This is the answer to what I call the Henry Kissinger question. He asked me over and over again, what happened in the 7th century? How did people from Mecca, right, living in the desert, suddenly in the space of 20 years become a world power? The answer, because Mr. Kissinger had not clearly read Ibn Khaldun, the answer was the sudden rise of asabiya. And for me, while asabiya's association has been very powerful and a very powerful fact of our history, I find it a problem in the modern era because its association and its legitimacy to the idea of royalty, and now its inability to transition into the nation state, when in fact asabiya could have been a force multiplier. And that, I think, is the reason why the third line of that triangle, rise, decline, renewal, why the third line of the triangle of renewal went missing in the history of Muslims in the 19th century. By the way, there is nothing called Islamic history. There is a history of Muslims. Islam is a faith. A faith is a belief. A belief, for those who do believe, is a constant. He mentioned just now in his own remarks that the larger point, I think, is that the codification of Islam was not something that was immediate. It took 200 years for the codification to start, even by the creation of the laws, which you had mentioned, the great lawgivers, and indeed including the Hadith, which became the basis of much of law as it was practiced. Now, you mentioned the question of one of our four great lawgivers, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, Ibn Hanbal, but all of them refused the patronage of the state, not just one, all of them. And all of them, now these are the 5 pillars of Islam as it is, translated into political doctrine or into social doctrine. All of them went to prison, but the important point is that because they challenged the state, because they went to prison, centuries later they still have credibility. Today, patronage has become piety. And that is the tragedy of our times, where even our ulama believe that they cannot survive without patronage. It's difficult for them to believe that the patronage of God is enough. I wish, Professor Ahmed, that I had seen more than I saw of Nizamul Mulk. Because Nizamul Mulk's book on governance should remain one of the, not only the great classics for Muslim societies, but one of the classics for all societies. Very often, and he introduced also elements of Sufism into his thinking, into his governance. I have a problem here because most people consider Sufism to be too spiritual. They think Sufism is music, which it all is, of course it is. But Sufism works because it is practical. Sufism works because it teaches you and me how to share the relationship of which is beneficial, which is not hostile. And it is the practical element of Sufism which really is triumphs over what you call deen wa dawla, which is the relationship of religion and the state. This relationship of state and religion is troublesome as always. But why did royalty in all religions, not just in Islam, in all religions, why did feudalism need religion? Because feudalism did not have legitimacy or credibility with the people. It was not a system born of the people. So in order to sell themselves to the people, they used God. Don't mention it too loudly, but the King of England is still the head of the church. That hasn't changed. So, one of the reasons why the Quran has so much of doctrine of governance and practical problems of governance inside it is because the Prophet was not only a messenger, and he was a messenger only for brief spells in his life. Only for those brief spells when he received the message. The rest of the time, he was just the best of men, but human. And it is his ideas of governance and the nature of war which leads to some of the most controversial verses in the Quran. Because he has to deal with the state. There are no comparisons, and please don't take me amiss, but I can't resist saying that if Jesus, for example, had become the king of the Jews, as many of his apostles wanted him to be, then Jesus would also have to lay a doctrine for the state. He couldn't have been just the prophet of the Sermon on the Mount. Now, to get to the mundane, please, from prophets to the mundane, which is very often when we look at the mundane, we have to look at people who are in. Gandhi gave us the whole doctrine of non-violence, which again, in 1918, two people emerged in the world. One was Lenin, one was Gandhi. And both of them dreamt of changing the world. They produced two models. In the end, Lenin's model collapsed in the Soviet Union. Gandhi's model still survives. But Gandhi, the father of non-violence, when he was there sitting, giving prayer meetings, when the invasion of Kashmir took place, British journalists, having lost the empire, they hadn't yet lost their voice. So they went and asked him, now Mahatma, what do you do about non-violence? He said, non-violence was a movement to defeat you. It is not an element of statecraft. So I support the use of state and army in order to protect the people. There is a lot of mention of Sayyid Qutb. I don't want to get into that, but I just want to remind anyone who thinks of him that Islam existed for 13 centuries before Sayyid Qutb. Democracy, another great issue taken up in the book. Analysis is very simple. Very simple. When we think that, and where I may offer a little disagreement with you, that when I look at democracy, I don't look at geography. I look at demography. How many people among the Muslim communities enjoyed democracy? The Indonesians do, Indian Muslims do. That is one of our greatest, makes us so significantly different. 500 million people, Muslims of the world, are enjoying free, unfettered democracy, freedom as understood by any template. The Chinese, from Adam till today, are still waiting for democracy. Now what does this tell us? that are states possible with and without democracy? All I'm saying is that this is something that requires more consideration as we develop. But I, being a completely fundamentalist Democrat, I agree with you completely that democracy is the answer, but more than democracy, what we need today is a return of the knowledge society. In the book, you will find great descriptions of, and I'll give you only one example, which is the Abbasid, Khalif Aziz. He had a library of 1 million books. But that is not alone. There were book cities all over: Damashq, Aleppo, Basra, Nishapur, Rai, Tus, Balkh, Bukhara, Marv, all over. It succeeded not because you had a sword. These empires succeeded because they had the mind and they had knowledge. And here I am reminded of Al-Baruni's book on India. When he came with Mahmud of Ghazni. And then he stayed back for 3 years. He learned Sanskrit. And then he asks a question. He said, how come a people who have created, he looks at a well, just the well in which reservoirs in which, how come a people who understand physics, who can keep water clean, who can keep it nourished, who give life, how come they are defeated all the time on the battlefield? And he doesn't attribute it to martial arts. He attributes it to something which I think requires thinking. He says, these are people who had the highest knowledge, but their elite forgot something, that knowledge only grows when you give it away. It's a fundamental fact of knowledge. And maybe at some point, we need to rediscover, the decline of knowledge in Muslim societies, and that's where the decline begins, is the inability of Muslim societies to adapt and acquire printing. Amazing. Gutenberg introduces in the 15th century, and if you go to Topkapi, your country, you will find a plaque outside that the first printing press came in 1715. Why? Why for 2.5 centuries later? Because Muslim elites refused to democratize knowledge. That's why. They refused to give away knowledge. Printing is the distribution of knowledge for the masses. And I tell you, that is the reason for the decline. And unless we reverse that, I tell you, in my view, sir, I'm trying very hard to hurry, I'll just quickly finish now, that the real problem with Muslim societies today is the inability to come to terms with modernity. That's the real problem. And this inability to come to terms with modernity is going to, if it is not addressed, it is going to, feudalism is not the answer. Variations of feudalism is not the answer. And political modernity begins with the emergence of the age of the nation state after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And the inability to understand the nation state and what it requires is, I believe, the fundamental problem. I will end by raising a very important challenge to the book. Sir, well, congratulations for everything. Your book is either incomplete or it has not brought the subject to the modern era. Because you cannot have an understanding of authoritarianism, Islam and underdevelopment without examining the story of Pakistan. Pakistan was the first state in history that was created for Islam. It was not created for Muslims. It was created for Islam. And you can see the fundamental weakness lay in the slogan of Pakistan. Islam khatre mein hai. Islam is in danger. That was the slogan that rode through and captured the Muslim mind, at least the middle class mind. I tell you, anyone who says that Islam is in danger is not a Muslim. Because if you are a believer, how can your faith be in danger? Muslims can be in danger, but Islam cannot be in danger. Islam was never in danger when there was only one Muslim in the world. How can it be in danger today? What right do you have to mislead the people with a false slogan and partition this country and create institutional, generational conflict into a society which has still not disappeared. Allah is Rabbul Alameen. Allah is not even Rabbul Muslimin. He's not only the Allah of just Muslims, he's the Rabb of the whole universe. You can't trap and imprison Allah into one nation state. Islam belongs to every Muslim. Pakistan doesn't belong to every Muslim. Jinnah, sir, was never a Muslim. Never a Muslim. I can recount you 10 things in order to justify it, but I'll just give you. He used to go abroad every year. Every year he would go, spend abroad. He never once went for Hajj. Not once. He used to stop in Cairo all the time. It was a minor detour. And Jinnah took Pakistan away from the philosophy of Baya, of companionship, of faith through a handshake, and made it into the faith of Sijda, but not Sijda to God, Sijda to the British. He maybe understood freedom, but he never understood independence. That is why Pakistan is the most dependent country in the world today. Maybe, sir, in your next edition, you will examine this. Thank you.